And there we go. We should be good to go. So yeah, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time to reach out to me and set up this online podcast. And you know, like my listeners know, I always prefer to do the show in person, but sometimes there's extenuating circumstances, and you connected with me. I think you have an important story to tell, and logistically it made more sense to do it over Zoom, and that's what we're doing. So for listeners, if it sounds a little weird or it's a little out of the norm for what you get on my show, I apologize, but it is what it is. And yeah, man, I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and thank you for making the accommodation.
And so obviously, you know, you have a career in the DOJ. I spent several years as part of that myself. And, you know, there's a lot to delve into, especially over the last week. There's been the Durham report, and the news has been focusing on a lot of aspects of the FBI's involvement with the, you know, the whole Russian collusion investigation. But before we go into that, I always like my guests to have an opportunity to kind of give a background of who they are, where they came from, and just flow this into more of a conversation instead of an interview. And I think people receive that better. So if you just like to take it from the beginning, and then we'll just have a conversation, man.
Sure. Great. And thanks to your audience for letting me share some time with you and them. As you mentioned, my name is Chris Piehota. I spent nearly 25 years with the FBI. And prior to then, I worked in the Kennedy Space Center Space Shuttle program. And before that, I was in the military. I served 6 active duty years with the Air Force. I know not the real military for you guys, you know, that we're hardcore.
If I had military to do it over again, I may have chosen Air Force.
Right. So, but I spent 6 years there. I picked up a high tech field, went to work in that Kennedy Space Center Space Shuttle program, and found myself at the shuttle program had already kind of reached its peak, and it was kind of on decline. It was being phased out. So every time it took off, we were scared to death. And every time it landed, we were scared to death. And, you know, it would come back into the atmosphere. You'd hear the 2 sonic explosions when it re-entered the atmosphere, and we would all hold our breath until it landed. So I told my wife at the time, I'd really like to get back to more of a service type of job. And coincidentally, I had qualified to go back into the military. I was going to go to helicopter pilot school, which I know you have a little bit of background there.
Yeah.
And I was going to officer candidate school for the Florida National Guard. And I had also applied to the FBI, but they were on a 3-year hiring freeze. So I didn't hear anything from them until one day I get a call from the lady who was the recruiter for the Tampa field office. She says, "Hey, are you still interested?" I said, "Sure." She goes, "Good. Can you be here this Sunday?"
That's the most typical government thing that I've ever heard. Because
absolutely,
it was the same thing with the U.S. Marshal Service when I went and I applied with them. I didn't hear anything for months and months and months, and then one day I got a phone call and it said, "Hey, are you available for a PT test?" I said, "Yeah, but when?" They said, "Right now." I said, "I got my daughter in the car right now, but if you want me to come down and blast a 2-miler with her standing on the sidelines, I'm happy to." And they're like, "Oh, why don't we schedule it for tomorrow then?"
Right. Well, it was awesome because I quit my job that Wednesday and drove to Quantico, Virginia to go to the FBI Academy, and that Saturday. And started with the FBI on Sunday. And it was about 3 weeks later that I actually got my acceptance letter.
Okay.
So I was out there on it, kind of winging a prayer, hoping it wasn't going to break bad on me.
Yeah, you were on the expedited process.
Oh, yeah. They must have got some money or something and said, "Hey, we're going to do a class. Let's do it now."
Yeah.
So
okay. What year was that?
That was 95.
Okay.
And
way back in the day.
Yeah, it was a little further back than I'd like to admit, but it was a little further back there. But great experience. Did the Quantico thing, graduated, you know, and I was really, at the time, I think the FBI, out of 100 candidates, they were having like a 90% attrition rate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I didn't 100
know people. Yeah, 100 people would apply. Only 10 would actually make it through the pipeline to the other side of Quantico for, you know, various reasons, right?
Yeah.
So 10 people would end up becoming an agent. So, and I'll tell you this much, even despite some of the jackassery that's going on right now with the FBI, it was a wonderful career. I'd do it again if they let me, and it was a great experience. And
Yeah.
I spent my first assignment was in the Newark, New Jersey field office, which at the time Newark was, I think, the murder capital, car hijacking capital, and I think it ranked up real high on number of AIDS cases in the mid '90s. So
Uh-huh.
when I told my wife where we were going, she just cried.
Isn't that the truth for almost all the agencies or branches of the military, though? Is like, I tell people the same thing about law enforcement. It's like the overwhelming majority of people that make up those organizations are great human beings that are
They're
there for
outstanding.
they're there for the right reasons. But unfortunately, it feels like the people at the very top that are calling the shots are the ones that are responsible for all the profession as a whole becoming tarnished, which I'm sure we're going to get into. But
Absolutely.
man, it's really frustrating because from the American people's standpoint, and I hear this all the time, people see either an isolated incident from a law enforcement officer or the case with the FBI right now, and that tarnishes the agency as a whole. When in reality, the overwhelming majority of people, boots on the ground, day to day, are great human beings.
They are remarkable people, and I'll say that about the FBI, but as the law enforcement profession in general, they're just remarkable people.
Well, and that's why I think the more people that get frustrated with having their profession tarnished by these certain corrupted individuals, we're going to see more and more people stepping up and being interviewed and sharing their perspective because it's necessary. It's necessary to protect the integrity of the majority of these different organizations.
Absolutely, because today's society with social media, we focus on, of course, the negative outcomes, and we focus on the exceptions. The exceptions become the rule,
Of course. Yeah.
and that's where I think we are now, largely with the FBI, and they haven't done themselves any favors, of course, right? I mean,
No, yeah, of course not.
yeah, they haven't done themselves any favors, but just going back to my time, and I'll kind of work real quick through my career so you can kind of see where I came through. At the time in the mid '90s, the FBI was still a very reactive law enforcement organization, cops and robbers, bank robberies, kidnappings, all that type of work, which was just awesome type of work. And of course, everybody joins the FBI to do that type of work. You want to go out with the warrant squads and roll up dirt bags and all that.
Of
kind
course.
of stuff, right?
What year did Point Break come out?
You know what? I don't know. I don't remember. It was a great movie, though.
Because I remember as a little kid watching that, and when Keanu Reeves chased Patrick Swayze for like that 10-minute chase scene where they're going through houses and getting hit with the vacuum and stuff. I remember as a little kid, I'm like, I want to chase bad guys someday. Yeah. And I honestly think that was like what planted the seed for me to want to be a U.S. Marshal at some point,
Well, yeah, everybody wants to chase bad guys and everybody wants to catch bad guys and all that stuff. So, of course, that's what everybody joins for. And as I'm in the Newark field office, we didn't have any shortage of bad guys in Newark, New Jersey at the time. But one of the things I was interested in was the counterterrorism aspect of the job, which was not fashionable. It was very low priority at the time.
Yeah.
And folks just didn't understand it, right? Because we were like, where do I put handcuffs on people? That was the mentality. And we had just come off of the first World Trade Center bombing in '93, and people were still confused about it, right?
Uh-huh.
What was this? Was this a criminal act? What was it? And the laws weren't up to speed. And so they did the best they could. And so I spent, from '95 through the academy through 2001, September, in the Newark field office. And on that morning of September 11th, 2001, I was sitting in the office. I saw the first plane strike out the window.
Wow.
My office, because I could look right across the Hudson. And I thought, wow, that's unfortunate. Somebody hit one of the trade centers. I thought that was just a terrible accident. And then a little while later, of course, someone comes running down the hall and says, the South Tower just got hit. And then we were off to the races with the Pentagon, and then of course Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So that whole night we were out till 3 a.m. rounding up people and taking them to Giant Stadium to do interviews
Uh-huh.
till about 3 or 4 in the morning. Went home, took a shower, came back, and then it was just nothing was ever the same, right?
Yeah.
So I went to headquarters after that. Did some international program management. I went a lot of new programs. The FBI culture shifted violently after 9/11. Right? We
Well,
no longer were the cops and robbers guys.
okay, yeah, and I think the federal government's kind of their role as a whole did, and
Right.
out of the gates, I think people got behind that and people supported that because they thought that the government had their best interest in mind, and then you will see over the years that public trust has been diminished, and now people look back on it and think like, you know, all of the with the Patriot Act and whatnot, and people feel like this was all a big government plan to kind of be able to do whatever they wanted as far as trampling on people's constitutional rights.
Well,
And I'm not necessarily saying that that's what happened, but I know a lot of people look back on that and feel like that was kind of the shift where big government kind of got to take control a lot more. What would you say to that?
I the intentions after 9/11 were reactionary. They were out of fear and desperation. We had our tails kicked, right?
Yep.
And when people ask me about that time period, because I was working, counterterrorism matters, and what I tell people just flat out, baseline, they were better than we were.
Yeah.
They were better. They had better plans, initiatives, execution. They were more dedicated, and they kicked our tails. And as a result of that shortfall on our part, people lost loved ones,
Yeah.
lives, family members.
And I tell people that all the time too, because I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and people are under the mindset like, oh, those are just like primitive cave people. And it's like, well, you can think whatever you want of them, but they have an ideology that they believe, and they're willing to die for it. And when you have those two things, you're a formidable enemy.
They're very dangerous, and they really they were able to work around all of our security measures and our countermeasures on things. They knew how to avoid us in the communities. They knew how to stay out of sight, and again, they were better than we were. And it was aside from the professional embarrassment. I mean, I tell people that it was never the same for me, because on our watch, people lost their loved ones and family members, and we had to give ourselves a swift kick in the ass to kind of get going. And that leads me back to what you said about the government's response. At first, it was I would use the word pure at first, and it was because we didn't have the legislative authorities and tools to do certain things in response. And that's where they very quickly came up with frameworks like the Patriot Act and other types of authorities, so that when we looked at things, we weren't able to be predictive and proactive based on our previous authorities and tools. That's why they were able to beat us.
Yeah.
And over time, though, like you said, it became more of like, well, let's see how we can leverage these tools. Let's see how we can expand them. Let's see how we can, do certain things. And I'll tell you, just as I lived in that world of classified stuff like you did at one point, there are many reasons for many things that, unfortunately, you can't share with the public.
Yeah.
And that's where the government doesn't do a very good job of building that relationship where they say, hey, please trust us. And then they do things, and you look at them and say, well, how can we possibly trust you?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't know what you can speak to, because obviously some stuff will remain classified. But like what we were told is that kind of part of the fallout of the Patriot Act and some of the abilities that it gave our federal government was literally what led to the apprehension of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was one of the masterminds of it. So on one hand, people will look at the Patriot Act and be like, we're losing our rights. And I'm a believer in rights more and freedoms as much as anybody. But there was some good that came out of it as well, because when KSM was apprehended, it was very clear that the wheels were already turning for follow-on attacks.
Absolutely. The organization that they all had run in at the time, that wasn't a singular event.
Yep. I know
that was a kickoff.
Yeah. There was plans to I know I heard about some plans, and maybe I'm violating OPSEC saying this, but it's been 20 years, so we'll see. But like there was plans to cut like suspension bridges down during rush hour traffic and stuff like this. And we actually did thwart some pretty massive attacks, and people never heard about that. But that's also part of operating inside of the intelligence community is like, you don't get a lot of attaboys, you know?
Well, one of those particular attacks you talk about, one of the events that was prevented, and this is public information, but there was a group of people that were going to detonate a fuel tanker on a major structure.
Yeah.
And we were able to interdict that type of activity and many others. Let me put it that way, many others, right?
Yeah.
And here's one thing I used to tell people, Greg, that when I was in charge of the terrorist screening center for the U.S. government, our people, we were in interdictive function, right? And I used to tell my people, our job is to maintain the status quo. And no one is going to come up to you at any point in any given day and say, hey, great job, nothing happened today.
Yeah. No, and, exactly, you know,
right. So I used to tell the folks that, and I would say, your thanks is the fact that these people can live their lives comfortably and safely in our communities, including your own family, friends, and everyone else. That's our reward. So, man. Yeah.
And see, like, as I sit here and listen to you tell these stories and like share these perspectives, it's like, that is what law enforcement has always been. And that's what it's supposed to be. And it's really sad that these agencies have now been intertwined with the corruption of politics, because let's be honest, like the American people's trust in politicians on both sides of the aisle is shot. It's gone. And it's going to take a lot of rebuilding. And, you know, for me personally, and I'm sure you've heard this your whole career about all the conspiracy theories surrounding 9/11, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to take massive offense to that because I'm boots on the ground. I'm going over to the other side of the planet. I've had friends killed in support of OEF and OIF, and it used to bother me. But the older I get, and now when I see how the American government has dealt with, you know, through the whole COVID pandemic and a lot of other things, and especially this, you know, the Russian collusion, which I'm sure we're going to get into in great detail.
Absolutely.
But now when I look at the U.S. government, there's a part of me that says, I don't know how far they would take it. I don't know what is a conspiracy theory or what might actually be taking place. And I know I'm a reasonable human being. And so a lot of people have a lot of distrust around the government. And now when I look back in hindsight, it's like, well, what did they know? What were they willing to cover up? And it's just sad because a lot of people that are, you know, like yourself, boots on the ground, that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to prevent the next attack, that are trying to keep Americans safe. Everybody thinks everybody is intertwined in the corruption that's going on. And I just don't see that being the case.
It's not. And I'll tell you, there are people who are sweating bullets every day to make sure that our national interests are protected, our citizens and our communities are protected. And there are people who honestly agonize and sweat bullets every day. I will tell you one thing is I tried to make this determination when I used to have to go up and testify, you know, and meet with congressional folks and the senators and the congressmen. And I told them that the part of the problem is we are charged with what I used to tell them was an imperfect balance between civil liberties and privacy and security.
Mm-hmm.
And I've told them that when there is no event or no crisis, we will be criticized and we will be called on the carpet for violating people's rights and all of those type of things, right? But when there's an event and there's a crisis, we will then be criticized for not going far enough.
Yeah, so it's a lose-lose situation
every time. And I told them that, and they all kind of smiled and said, yeah, we get it, right? But
dude, I tell people all the time is that freedom and security are kind of in conflict with each other.
They are inverse functions.
Yeah, if you want absolute freedom, just know that gives everybody else absolute freedom. And with that comes a lack of security. And if you're the type of person that is very comfortable providing your own security and taking care of yourself and being able to protect your own family and whatnot, that may not be a big deal. But for a lot of people that don't have that capability, you have to understand that for the government to have the ability and the oversight to be able to keep our society safe and protect our citizens, man, that's now it starts to become a balancing act, like you were saying.
Right. And it's an imperfect balance on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that trust and that faith in the government comes in, to say that we trust you and we have faith in you. And we used to have more of that than we do now.
For
and here's
sure.
one other point I'd like to just put out for just discussion is I always used to tell the folks is that you have to look at there's a relationship antagonism between, is it evil or is it ineptitude?
I ask myself that question almost daily when I see the things that are happening. The way that I always phrase it, is it intentional or is it incompetence? You know?
Right.
And trust, I'm sure you've seen it more than I have because you spend a lot more time with the federal government. And this isn't me talking shit. This is just my own personal experience. There is a lot of incompetence inside of the federal government.
And I hate to say that you're right, but there is a fair share.
As an 1811 criminal investigator with the U.S. Marshal Service, I had, and this is a true story. It sounds ridiculous, but I had people that worked in my office that were 30 minutes, 45 minutes late to work almost daily. And we had court proceedings and we had prisoner transports, all the stuff that the Marshal Service does. And hey, where's Deputy so-and-so? And you text him, oh, I'm stuck in traffic. It's LA. Yeah, it is LA. That's why I always give myself twice as much time to get where I need to get to. But the interesting thing is, it's like, you couldn't work at McDonald's and show up late every day. But for the federal government, it's all good. Because if they don't have this extensive paper trail and counseling statements and all the things that are necessary to discipline, it becomes very difficult. And it's I saw it over and over and over where guys that seemed very inept seem to just kind of always snake their way through, and then before you know it, they're promoted. And it's we used to say fuck up, move up. And it yep. seems like the most inept members of your office are the ones that are clawing each other's eyes out trying to get promoted, whereas a lot of times the normal guys that are good at their job and like hitting the streets and just like being the day-to-day, we call them PODs, plain old deputies, they're not chasing the promotions, they're chasing bad guys. But what inevitably ends up happening is you're working for the most inept people, and I felt like it kind of tarnishes the whole organization as a whole.
I agree, and I think the problem you have is, and everything to me in my whole career, it comes down to leadership. Everything.
Yep, 100%.
It doesn't matter what's going on. If you have bad leadership, your people will suffer and they will underperform, even despite their own best efforts. You can only put good people in a bad system so long before the system wins. It's just it's how
100%. Yep.
Right. And what I find is that in the instances that you mentioned, it comes down to culture as well.
Yeah. Yep. 100%.
Right? I mean, because I'll tell you, in the places that I've served, and I was very fortunate to serve in, to be in a leadership role, because it's a privilege, right? Leadership's a privilege. The cultures in some places were just phenomenal cultures. I mean, they policed themselves. They were early all the time, and they were on time every time. And these people were phenomenal people. They would bleed to make sure things got done. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's just how that place ran, and that's how the leadership made things right. Other places, not so much, right? Where you have that kind of mediocrity and no one cares. And I actually had a conversation I was the special agent in charge up at the Buffalo, New York field office. And that's pretty far from the flagpole in DC. So they kind of developed some of their own practices. And I came out of DC and went up there, and I'm watching, and finally I get him in the room and say, look, guys, we're not bagging groceries here. You guys got to start acting like FBI people, right? Because they kind of, just do what they do. But as you said, it's a cultural issue, and And as we move through the conversation, the FBI's culture when I first came in was on the outside of the Hoover years, right?
Uh-huh.
So a lot of the guys, and here's what happens, right? And I'm sure, from your military time and your time with the marshals and everything else, we were all a bunch of FNGs, right? We're all sitting we all come in, and a couple of the older guys say, okay, all of you guys come with me. So a couple of the older guys take us in a conference room, they close the door and they say, okay, here's how it works. And they gave us the lowdown. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. You don't do this and you don't do that. And above all, no matter what you're doing, the rule is you never embarrass the Bureau. Got it? And that we had that conversation with them where they told us what was acceptable and what wasn't, and what the culture was of the organization. That has kind of eroded over time. And I think it's been to the detriment of the organization that culture has over time either been eroded or it's actually been discouraged on some levels, right? You get the new FBI after 9/11, the old cultural practices and values that made the FBI what it was and made it a special organization have been kind of watered down or just outright discarded.
Well, one thing that I've seen across the board, military, federal law enforcement, and local law enforcement, something that the people that aspire to be part of that profession have always prided themselves on is being hard chargers, being tough, being physically fit, being willing to go out there and get after it. And it seems like that now is starting to be demonized more and more and more, to where, like, I know in the state of Washington, they're looking at removing fitness standards altogether for the profession of law enforcement. And that may, some people may hear that and not think that, like, that is something that's absolutely egregious. But being a physically active, strong, capable human being, that's part of being a protector and part of being in the profession of law enforcement. And that's just one example. And, shooting standards, all of these different things, it's like, I don't know if it's by design again or by incompetence, but it's like everything seems to just continuously degrade over time, to the point where now you got a group of people that are basically incapable of doing the job.
Well, incapable or not very good at it, right?
Yeah.
And here's the problem with the FBI. They did the same thing with physical fitness standards. They were removed for a period of time because of litigation. There were litigation problems about how the fit test was set up and what was required for the job. And you got a bunch of lawyers attached to everything. And then they actually just removed, they made it voluntary, which, means nobody did it. Right. And
yeah. Right. Well, and another interesting thing, same thing with the Marshal Service. I know that getting hired a lot of times still requires a PT test. But once you're hired, you're basically grandfathered for life. And the only way that people would want to take a PT test is if they incentivize them. And it's like, you shouldn't have to be incentivized to show that you're still physically capable of doing the job. But again, like, it all goes down, like you said, to litigation and rules and people filing grievances and people suing the agency. You can't make me go out and do push-ups. It's like, you want to be an FBI agent, you're damn right we can make you go do push-ups.
Well, it was part, again, the culture, right? The erosion of culture in the Bureau was, when you look back in time, what was your mental picture of FBI agents when they would show up somewhere?
Oh, it was exactly Keanu Reeves, showing up,
shave,
showing up and being able to chase a dude for 10 minutes and kick his ass and take him into custody,
Right. And you had a bunch of guys who showed up in suits that, very stoic looking, big dudes or, just guys in shape. And that was the stereotype. And over the years, that's been kind of done away with, again, to our detriment. I think not everybody's going to be good physical specimens, and I get that, but if you're grossly overweight, and not only do you embarrass the organization, you don't uphold the brand of the organization, and I think it just starts kind of watering down the again, the esprit and everything else that people look at. When you show up as an FBI agent, they expect a certain level of appearance, right? And capability,
as they should, you
right?
know.
And capability. It's like when the marshals show up at when you show up with some of your marshals, those guys are looking. They're expecting to see a couple of guys who are going to kick the shit out of them if they get out of hand, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's just how it is. That's what they expect, and they also, it's the behavior. They expect a certain behavior
Yes.
out of you, right?
Yep. 100%.
And some of that has gone away. Real quick story: we were up when I was in New Jersey. We hit a outlaw motorcycle gang clubhouse. So we go in. Tactical unit goes in first to clear the place. We bring all the guys out. We sit them on the curb. They're a bunch of older gentlemen, right? But they all had their outlaw vests and everything on. A couple of 1%ers, that good stuff. And we were standing there talking to them, and somebody said something. He goes, "Oh yeah, we knew you guys was the feds." So we looked at him and said, what do you mean? "Oh yeah, you guys weren't assholes. You guys treated us like people." And
Yeah.
and it was, I mean, it's like they expected the feds to be professional and squared away, and that's what they got, right?
Yeah.
And it broke my heart. You could see where the culture shifted from what the FBI used to be expected to do and behave during the BLM riots. I don't know if you saw any of the footage where agents took a knee. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw them, and it was like, I felt kind of a little bit sick when I saw it. And I thought, why would you do that? The FBI doesn't take a knee, and the FBI doesn't take sides, and the FBI is there to make sure that people can exercise their First Amendment rights safely and professionally. And the FBI doesn't take a knee.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you know my whole story about how I ended up getting fired over the COVID deal and all that stuff.
Yes.
But I started to see that on a local level as well. And here's the thing. I believe in community policing. I believe that I'm a member of the community first before I'm a law enforcement officer. But what I saw was these officers, or in your case, like these agents, they didn't believe in the cause. They didn't believe in what BLM was pushing. They were just bending to social pressure. And if you show our citizens that you bend to social pressure as a law enforcement officer, you're losing credibility.
Yeah, I was, like I said, it broke my heart to see it. And what I wanted to do is find out, and again, I had already left the organization, but I wanted to find out who was in charge there, who allowed that to happen, who didn't take the leadership role to walk out to some of those folks and say, "Hey, you know what? We're here to protect you.
Yeah.
So keep moving." And not only that, but to tell the agents, "Hey, this is how you're going to behave here, and this is if they approach us, here's what we're going to do." It seemed like none of that. They were just kind of milling about smartly. They took a knee, and again, it broke my heart. It showed a little bit of that cultural erosion that we had talked about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think everybody saw that cultural erosion nationwide, and not just with any specific agency, but with all of them.
Yeah.
Because what year did you end up retiring?
2020.
2020. Were you okay? So I mean, you were either right there or close to retirement when all of this stuff was transpiring. And one thing that I talk about on my show often is like behind closed doors in the lunchroom, officer to officer talk. Everybody was disgusted with what we were seeing. Right. Not only disgusted with the politicians that were actually promoting the riots and the burning of our cities and supporting it, but also disgusted watching other police officers and the way they were behaving and the way that they were, enforcing these mandates or the lockdowns or in regards to the BLM stuff. But it seemed like no one was willing to say anything. And it's like, man, America is starving for their law enforcement officers to stand up and show that they are on the side of the people, and that's what they're here to do, and they are their best interest. They are for our best interest, and they're going to serve and protect. And it felt like just this divide started to form. And I mean, that's what motivated me to speak out in the beginning, because I felt like that divide, man, it's going to become the Grand Canyon before we know it, and then it might become irreparable. And it's there's definitely an ebb and flow to it, but it doesn't seem like people are trusting of the profession anymore.
Well, I think that social pressure and social change hasn't been navigated well
Mm-hmm.
in certain instances. And I'll say that for the law enforcement community, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not casting blame on any body or any one department. I'm talking about the community itself didn't properly navigate the changes in certain social attitudes, and the community found itself kind of caught short. I'll give you a
Yeah.
real quick example. Do you remember when the FBI had its big dust up with Apple?
No, I'm not. I don't
Yeah,
know if I'm
a couple
refresh me.
years ago. Yeah, a few years ago, the FBI got into kind of a pissing match with Apple, where we wanted them to give us access to certain data and certain
That's right.
information,
Yeah, that's right. And
right?
they said no.
And they said no, and we all stood back and said, "Excuse me," right? And
Yeah, we're the FBI.
exactly,
Look at this
right,
piece of tin on my back
right,
or my
yeah,
belt.
and Apple promptly said they really didn't care. So what we did is what we generally did was we went back at them harder,
Uh-huh.
right? So Apple then outmaneuvered us, and they became the protector of privacy for the public against government overreach. And they outmaneuvered us completely. We looked like idiots, and
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I
we
do
all
remember
stood
that now.
back. Yeah, we all stood back looking and saying, "What the hell just happened here?"
Yeah, they how that yeah, exactly.
Right? And we didn't read the social cues, and the social attitudes became more important among the folks in the in communities looking at it. And Apple saying, "We're protecting you from the government looking at your stuff," and all that. And that's how, again, we just didn't read that well, and that was an example of our inability to look at some of those things. And I sat with the director one day and I said, we've got to get better, especially on that technological side of
Yeah,
looking at social attitudes, not just technology, right? Technology now is tied to people's lives.
of course. Yeah, you
And
can't. I mean, your phone tells your whole life story basically now.
yeah. I mean, you people talk about the integration of humans and machines. It's already happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not implanted in your head yet.
It's just not, yeah, it's just not under my skin yet, right? This
what
thing
would
I
you
have to.
What would you say to the people? And I know a lot of people are concerned about this, and even people that are highly intelligent that are good friends of mine, is that the government does have a digital footprint of every single last person in America. Uh, I don't know if that seems feasible or not. I know if I
I
mean,
will tell you.
okay.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No,
I
I
stepped
was
off.
just going to say, like, I know when I was with the feds, like, we could get up on someone's phone, but it would take a court order. And then, yeah, at that point, we could triangulate them and take them out coming out of a store or a Starbucks or whatever. But shy of a court order, we didn't just have blanket access to everybody's data, which a lot of people believe that the federal government does have now. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, that's not true.
Okay. Yep.
And the federal government still has to get court orders, and the federal government still has a process that it goes through to obtain certain digital information about people. And then there are very strict rules on what you can retain in certain record databases, what has to be purged, and all of that type of thing. And a lot of folks don't understand the government agonizes over these rules and compliance with its own policies more than people would realize.
Uh-huh.
And it was actually painful to the investigative cadre to have to comply with all of these different rules and all of these different. I mean, they made a booklet called the Domestic Investigation and Operations Guideline. This thing's like 800, 900 pages, right?
Yeah. Another typical government document.
Right. And I told them this is a minefield for people, right? But that's how much they agonize over. They tell you what you can and can't do. And the FBI has been getting beat up lately, if you've seen it in the news, about using certain authorities to get certain information and query data that they really shouldn't have been. And those types of things they're working through, because a lot of this is new to them as well, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we can collect on certain levels and collect certain data at volume. And then what happens is what they're afraid of is they collect this data at volume, and then they have this time bomb sitting in a data repository that they didn't check or exploit properly. And then they're going to say, you could have prevented or you could have known. And it scares the death out of them that they would have failed to prevent something because they didn't do that. But to get back to what initial, they agonize over it. Now, the government does have considerable ability to do signal collection
Yeah.
around the globe. And that's where the arguments come in now about how much can they collect. It's not the collection, it's the access. The government no longer owns all of those systems like it once did when we still had, we had 3 or 4 big telecom companies. Now the government no longer owns or regulates those systems when you have Facebook and Google and all these worldwide digital services organizations. They have the information. The government can get access to it, is how it works.
Okay. And all of those big organizations are putting more and more roadblocks up. Is that correct?
When it suits their purposes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. When it suits their purposes, because you'll hear about during the January 6th investigation.
I was just going to say, J6
there were
is probably.
Yeah, there were certain organizations that just all of a sudden volunteered a bunch of information to the government.
Yeah. Well,
right.
and that was actually where I was going to take this next, is I think another big reason why people are becoming distrustful of the federal government is it does seem like they are picking and choosing who they go after or who they label a domestic terrorist. And, like I'm sure you're familiar with Mike Glover. Mm-hmm. He's a personal friend of mine, and he was literally deemed a domestic terrorist by the FBI. And it's just absolutely fucking ridiculous. And knowing Mike personally, I mean, I was at his house outside of Salt Lake, and we were having dinner laughing about how silly it is. And luckily Mike is comfortable enough in who he is that he can, like, I mean, I'm not saying he just let it roll off his shoulders, but he can see it for what it is and move past that. But we're seeing more and more where it's like, hey, these conservative minded people that are freedom based, like the same thing they did in Canada with the freedom truckers or the J6 people. And it seems like they're kind of taking sides, and that's a problem.
Yeah, there is definitely an appearance of selective application of certain laws and certain statutory authorities, and also a perception of a selective application. Right? We seem to apply these rules and laws to certain people with greater enthusiasm.
Well, and this is a perfect segue into a question that I wanted to ask you, because I had a very limited experience within the federal government. I worked for the Marshal Service for 5 years, so I didn't get to see like several administrations go through. But one thing that I do know that takes place is every time a new administration is voted in, they go out there and they basically hand select a bunch of new leadership for the entire DOJ. Like the sitting marshal in any district is, if a new president is inaugurated, that guy can pretty much kiss his job goodbye, because a new one is going to be appointed under the new administration. And what it feels like to me is all of these high-ranking positions within the DOJ know that, man, if I don't toe the line with the current administration, I'm on the chopping block. And so it seems like, they go after, or they put their energy or their resources into things that support the current administration, and that's not how law enforcement is supposed to work.
Yeah, I agree. There seems to be it's actually more evident than it once was. I mean, you always want to take care of your boss and you want to satisfy your boss. And the political appointees, they change out with the turnover of administrations. Yep. Then they bring in I would say, the priorities of the new administration, right? That's why they're appointed. And it's just become more evident now, where in some instances it's almost, I mean, it is so just, I don't know how to put it other than shameless, the way it works. But what I've seen is that on a political level, as these folks get all traded out, some strategic things get put in place, but most of the operations are left to the career, like senior executive service folks. They stay in place. They're the continuity. So for the FBI, and I'll speak only for the FBI, when the new director comes in, they may want to change a few things, and they may want to change some strategic issues, priorities on certain issues, but the operations stay the same because the operational chief is the deputy director. He is an FBI agent, career agent, senior executive service manager. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's how it is in most of the places where when you see the political appointees trade out, it's that SES level, senior executive service level leadership cadre that keeps the continuity, that makes sure that the priorities are maintained and that the organization keeps running in line with certain, expectations and rules and compliance issues.
Okay. What are your perspectives on J6? Since we kind of touched on it, but we kind of breezed right past it, because there's a lot of people that believe that the FBI was culpable in almost orchestrating it.
Well, I'll comment on what's in the news media, right? They talked about the FBI had and other organizations had undercover people in the crowd.
Yes.
That is a standard practice.
Okay.
That is a standard practice where, like, say, during the inauguration, the presidential inaugurations, DC is packed with people who come in for the inauguration. It is common practice for the FBI and other security partners to put people in plain clothes out in the crowds. They watch what's going on. They're there for in case of an emergency or a contingency, that they're on site, they're on location. Plus, they can give ground truth. If somebody says, "Hey, there's something going on," no, I'm standing right here. It's good. We're good, right? They can help resolve problems at that ground truth level, and that's a common practice. Plus, they radio back in. They give live human surveillance, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm standing at this point. Everything's calm," or, "Hey, we're at this point. It's getting a little wild down here. You might want to send some people this way," right? So that's common practice.
Well, I know a lot of people. I'm sure you've seen the video, and the gentleman's name is slipping my mind, who was like, "Let's storm the Capitol. Let's go. Let's go." And he was one of the most prominent faces going around social media saying, "Let's storm the Capitol." And then you never heard anything about him again. But the guy with the buffalo hat was in solitary confinement for 20 months because he walked down a hallway next to a Capitol police officer. And people are starting to connect the dots and be like, this just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And you're right. And that's where that credibility starts taking some hits when you have that, what appears to be selective application of law and justice.
And
right?
so what people are now, and I don't know if this is based in truth or if this is just an inference based on how people are just looking at all the different facts, but they're saying like, well, the reason they won't release all the footage is because there was FBI agents there conducting themselves egregiously. And it's like, well, maybe not. But at the same time, wouldn't you just release all the footage then and say, "Hey, look, this is what happened. We don't have anything to hide," Yeah,
I'm not sure why they wouldn't release the footage unless they're just concerned about. And I'll take the optimistic side of it, where I'll say that they may be concerned with outing certain people who may have been in undercover capacities, potentially people where they could start looking at identities and social media may out some people and create some operational problems. That's one reason why. Another reason why, of course, is the political wrangling. They don't want it out there because of it may either discredit certain lines of conversation or not. But
dude, the weird thing about J6 is I think everybody with a brain that works can look at what happened and be like, okay, it was a bunch of people kind of fired up, kind of bent out of shape about how the government's been treating them, and they pushed into the Capitol, and it was what it was. It certainly wasn't an insurrection. It certainly wasn't a takeover. It's like I tell people all the time, an infantryman that's went through an E3 from the 101st could give you a better plan on how to take down a building than what we saw. It was all discombobulated. There was no coordination. They didn't block any access points of ingress or egress. It was just a mob mentality. But it feels like now with the way that the government's structured, anybody on the right, if they can point them out to be a domestic terrorist and attach that title to them and make them look like a terrible human being, they jump at the chance. Meanwhile, you got organizations on the left burning cities down, and it's all good. They're just expressing how upset they are with the, and it's like, it's this double standard that everybody is sick
Well,
of.
and that's where that credibility is starting to wane with the law
Yeah.
enforcement community when you have that what looks like a polarized view of what's okay for some people is not okay for others.
Yeah.
And the January 6th thing, I mean, I've talked to people and I've just told them flat out, you had a bunch of folks that got really too fired up. They were really just way too shot in the ass what was going on. You're right. It was a mob mentality. They got wound up. No different than when you get a big fight going at a sports event or something along those lines.
100%. Yeah.
And that's what happened, and it shouldn't have happened. It was bad decision making for some folks, but the way that some of them have, and if it was that easy to run an insurrection to take down the government of the United States, I think some of our foreign adversaries would have already kind of took us off the board.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a good point I've never thought of. If you say like, oh, look, this was they almost overthrew the government. It's like, what does that say about
Yeah.
you guys?
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at. If it was that easy to take out the U.S. government,
Well,
I'm sure we'd all be brushing up on our Mandarin Chinese right now.
yeah. And I can tell you too, the thing that disgusted me more than anything about J6 was that we saw sitting members of Congress like hiding under chairs,
Yeah.
and I even saw men like cowering behind women. And the thing that bothers me personally is someone that did 14 deployments to combat for this country. I know what it takes to stand up and face adversity face to face. And I can tell you on plenty of different occasions, I didn't think I was going to come home alive. Like, man, in Ramadi in '04 and '05, there was a ton, daily combat engagements. And then I see our policymakers on TV cowering from a group of people walking around. And the only thing I could think of is like, man, those fucking people are the people that have the power, the legislative power to declare war and send our sons and daughters to the other side of the planet to do the things that I did. And they don't even have the courage to face a group of people that are angry. And it came full circle for me. And it was like, wow,
It was disappointing.
very
Let me put it to you
disappointing.
this way: when I'm looking at our national leadership, and this is the highest level of governmental leadership in this country, the leading country of the free world, and our leaders are cowering, and I would say just not behaving in a very dignified manner in certain instances, right?
And it's important. Again, like you said, everything comes down to leadership, right? Leadership 101 is I've been in plenty of incidents overseas and as a police officer where I was uncomfortable or maybe I did feel some fear. But in the moment, it's important to show courage and show strength and stand up and say, hey, we got this. We're going to be okay. Even if the end result isn't that, up until that point, you have to show strength and leadership and courage. We didn't see any of those attributes. And it just made me realize it's like, man, the people that have weaseled their way into what we call leadership in our country, and I'm putting that in quotations, they don't hold the morals and the values that most of the men and women expect from leaders. And,
Right.
I think a big part of that is, are you familiar with Andy Frisella? Do you listen?
Yes, I love his show.
So Andy's become a personal friend of mine. We talk fairly often, but I was listening to him today and he was listening to, and I forget their names, but it was two members of Congress going back and forth. And it was just hard to listen to. It was like children. And he goes, that's why I can't do that shit. I could never be part of all of that. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Bickering. I would kill somebody. And it's, and I feel like on a federal level, our government is so at odds with each other on the opposite sides of the political spectrum that it's just gridlock constantly. And they're not moving forward to try and make America the best place that it can be for the citizens, but they're trying to move forward in a manner that serves their political interests and their political party. And that's not sustainable, man,
Well, you can see, just from when I was still in DC, the primary or the priority, let me put it this way, was to gain advantage, not to solve a problem.
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And at that point, we would leave certain meetings, and everybody would be very happy with themselves, but the problem remained.
Yeah.
And I found that to be challenging at times when here I am looking at certain issues and saying, well, wait a minute, if we don't do this right on the severe end of things, people's lives could be impacted. Right.
Yeah.
On the low end of things, we could be embarrassed and look like idiots. Right. So, but no one seemed to be very interested in that more than the maneuvering on things.
And what's sad about it is these people that are in positions of power, right? These political positions of power, it seems like it's a battle every 4 or 8 years to get in charge and take the reins. And then you kind of steer the system to benefit your party. And right. Then it's a pendulum and it just swings back and forth, right? But see, while our American pendulum is just swinging back and forth, we're not progressing. Whereas the Chinese Communist Party, they have a 1,000-year plan.
They have 5-year plans. They publish them.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
5 years. They can tell you, here's what we're going to do for the next 5 years. And then they actually do it.
Whereas
in the United States, we live in 90-day increments in our
country. Whereas if these political parties could say, hey, we have different belief structures, we have different opinions on an array of different matters, but in the national interest to maintain the world superpower, we have to always be moving forward. We can't be just swinging back and forth. And it's crazy that me, a knuckle dragging Army Ranger, can understand that concept. And people in the highest political power positions, the thing is, they do understand it, but they're more concerned about what's self-serving.
Right. They've been hypnotized by the fact that their party it's their way. There's the right way, and then it's their way.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing I found to be challenging when I left the government, and it even started happening in the FBI. We weren't immune to it, but I told the director this. One of the challenges we have is that we've gone to whenever there's a leadership turnover, we've gone to an approach of replacement versus succession.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And I tried to explain, like, when you see when you're watching a football game and a quarterback gets injured, when the next quarterback comes in, what does he do? He picks the ball up and he starts moving it down the field. He starts using the plays. They start moving forward again.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
He doesn't come in and start swinging a tennis racket, and he doesn't come in and start doing different stuff that nobody knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? This is mid-game, but we're going to do it my way now. And
exactly.
And all you guys don't know what my way is, but just watch. We're going to do it my way.
And that's what started happening. And you want to talk about the fatigue that causes in the organizations.
Yeah.
And that's when everybody stands around, hands in their pockets, saying, okay, let's just wait and see if this sticks. If not, we'll wait for the next guy to come in or lady to come in. And that's where you started getting that erosion, because, Greg, nobody came in and said, all right, everybody take a breath. Here's my couple of little things I'd like you to know about me, but here's where we're still going to push this way.
Yeah.
And that stopped happening.
When we look at when the Biden administration took office, and I'm going to ask you this because this is the belief of many, many Americans. Again, like we've referenced several times, there's incompetence and then there's nefarious actions, right? That almost seem like they are by design, like the border crisis. Yeah. Why are we experiencing that? Why is the federal government doing what they're doing when everybody can see clearly what's happening, and the solution wouldn't be that difficult to implement?
Well, from what I was looking at, some of my friends are very guys I used to work with. They're very high-ranking CBP officials, and I've gotten some feedback from them. Of course, there's nothing but frustration and unhappiness on their side. They're not allowed to do their jobs, and
that's just it. If you let them do their job, the problem would be solved. But they're tying their hands. And remember, like every opportunity. Remember that there was a picture of a border agent with a rope, and they're like,
"Oh, the horseman."
He's whipping people.
Well,
it's like,
here's the thing: is when that administration came in, their position was to create polarization.
Yes,
right?
100%. Which, if your position is to create polarization, you have to honestly say. And again, like 10 years ago, if someone would have said this to me, I would have said, "You're a whack job. Put your tinfoil hat on." But this can no longer be incompetence. It seems like it's by design. And why would a sitting administration be trying to degrade the continuity of America?
It's how you stay in power, right? I mean, here's the thing, and in your former military experience, when you want to do something like that, destabilize, you problematize something, and then you polarize or marginalize a group of people, and then you demonize someone as the cause of it.
Yep,
I mean,
100%.
that's it, right? That's pretty much boiled down, probably oversimplified, but that's basically what happens, and that's why we have all the issues we have now between racial strife, the whole transgender movements and everything else.
1,000%.
Right.
I can tell you, as a gym owner, like that is my profession now, and between my two facilities that are right next to each other, we're two separate facilities, but we're kind of one. We have 400 members. Nobody cares what color your skin is.
Exactly.
Nobody cares who you go to bed with. Like nobody, and I'm not just saying on the right or the left, I'm saying everybody. Like, dude, everybody gets along. Everybody's there to train on the mats and jiu-jitsu. Like, I have a transgender athlete that nobody even knows is transgender because it's not a bone of contention.
Let me tell you a quick story. When I worked in the organization I worked in the bureau, I got there and there was a transgender person there, and they were former military, right? And I didn't know, I'd never met this person, and some folks came down and were telling me, because I was the deputy for operations, and they said, "Hey, somebody such and so won't do this and won't do that." I said, "Really?" So I hitched my pants up and I go walking down the hall, and this person sitting there, and they were a trans woman. And I said, "Hey, can we have a talk for a second? I understand this ain't getting it." They stood up and towered over. They looked down at me and kind of said, "All right, what's the problem here?" And so we talked about it. But what I was going to say was, this person was one of the most brilliant people I'd ever met. And she was outstanding and took care of business. I mean, just outstanding. Now, they had this issue with this whole trans thing. But what I looked at was not what they looked like. Were they dependable? Did they do a good job? Were they mission focused? Were they ready to take care of the business? And they were. They hit everything perfect. It didn't matter.
And that's the truth. And especially in the private sector, like the private sector, the overall mission is, how can we be the most profitable that we can be? Right. And when that's your mission, nobody cares about all this stuff.
Well, you should. You should. But it seems like now it's a little bit more prevalent. I'll tell you one other thing, Greg. When you were with the Marshals, did you see any racial problems in the Marshals?
I reference this all the time because I was on the special response team. We served all the high-risk warrants in the Central District of California, and we were on the special response team. There was 3 white guys, 3 Mexican guys, 3 Asian guys, and 3 black guys. And we used to joke, we're like the most racially diverse team that there is, right? And we busted each other's balls. You know what I mean? Like when it would come time to do our swim qual, the black guys would be like, "Oh, fuck, we hate the pool." And I guess because you guys are non-swimmers, all that shit, right? Oh, you can't say that. But it's all in fun and it's all in banter. That's
camaraderie.
Yeah, it's camaraderie. And like we would go do team climbs out in, like Cucamonga Peak and go out into the woods and stuff. And the black guys on my team would literally you can call this a stereotype, but they're like, "Man, why you fucking white guys always want to go out in the woods? Our people don't go out in the fucking woods. We're going to sit this one out." And everybody would laugh and have a joke about it. Nobody cared, right?
And you know how many?
The truth is, we are different. We are different, and our differences should be celebrated, because if everybody was Greg Anderson, the world would be pretty fucking boring, right? And so the fact that we're different, we have different beliefs or different ways that we like to spend our time, or different cultures, that was never an issue at all.
I'll tell you, my 25 years with the FBI, I was never party to, or nor did I see any overt discrimination or 100%. Racial bias.
10 years inside of the professional law enforcement, I served lots of warrants. I arrested plenty of people. And not one time, and I'm not saying this to protect anybody. I say whatever the fuck I want on my show. People know that I say the truth. Never once did I hear an officer or a deputy be like, hey, you see those black guys over there? Man, let's hem them up. I just didn't experience it. I didn't experience it in the military either. So 20 years of operational experience, I saw none of it. And that's what leads me to believe a lot of this is fabricated. And to go back to what you're saying is if you cause division, it keeps certain people in positions of power, right? Man, to me, that's treason. Because if you're going to stir the pot in the nation that you're supposed to be serving for self-serving interests, that's a big, big problem, man.
Well, I agree. And, like I told you before, leadership's a privilege, right? And, if you have to divide people and have everybody at each other's throats so you can remain in some sort of position of authority, then you have no business being there.
Well, and that's why I think more and more Americans on both sides of the political aisle do think term limits are now probably what is going to correct this problem because, man, politics was never supposed to be a career. It's supposed to be, just like you said, leadership, not only is it a privilege, but it's a burden, right? Like being in charge.
One that we assume, but it's one that we assume.
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, like, when you're asked to step into a leadership position, that should come with a lot of anxiety. That should come with a lot of like hesitation because every time you step up in rank, now more and more people lives are going to be affected by your decisions, right?
You got it.
And on the federal government, that's the macrocosm of it. But when you look at the microcosm of it, like a small, for me, an example, like when I got promoted to sergeant in the Ranger Regiment, I'm now in charge of a team. And bro, that was terrifying to me. And I didn't want it because I was like, dude, I'm not ready to take a team. And my platoon leader pulled me aside in Afghanistan because the normal way of promoting in the military is you submit a packet, you go to the review promotion board, they assess you, and then they determine if you are qualified to become an NCO. I didn't do that. And then we deployed shortly after, and my platoon leader pulled me aside and he goes, hey, Greg, I have the authority to do what's called a combat promotion. So you are now a sergeant and you're taking Alpha 3-1. And it's like, no, but I think that's how it should feel. It should come with a lot of like expectations. And in response to that it's anxiety. It's like, dude, I don't have the authority to tell all these guys what to do, but now I'm in the position. So guess what I did? I broke out 7-8. I reviewed all the infantryman tactics and I reviewed my Ranger handbook and I looked at everything that I could to make sure that I was the best sergeant that I could be. And that may be, you're only in charge of 5 people or whatever it was at the time.
Doesn't matter.
But it's a mentality. It doesn't matter if it's a brigade or a team. Like, you have to look at leadership like that. And I think a lot of our military leaders do, but we don't see that in politics.
No, I think they assume a position, and because they hold a role and they have position power, they equate that with leadership, and it's not. And you know that, and I know that. And when it comes to every leadership position I moved into that I was fortunate to be in, I asked for, and I was with the greatest of humility and anxiety, like you said.
Yeah.
And gratitude, because I asked to take the leadership role. And then I went in and this is something that I think we see in the national leadership a little bit more than we would like is that there's a sense to me, as now that I'm out in the peanut gallery, right? There's a sense of arrogance that I think
100%
keeps everything from moving forward. And if we can get past that arrogance somehow to come back and say, hey, you know what, Greg, we sit on opposite sides of this issue, but I understand how you feel on that. And is there a way that we can get to a point where, we're not, neither of us are going to get 100% on this, but we can do this for the best of the community. And we can stand together somewhere and say, here's what we're doing for the welfare of the community. Yes. And I think people would be just floored by that. Right.
Well, if a candidate ever runs under that platform, stand by, because people are begging, they're starving for that.
Yeah.
You know?
And again, that goes back to leadership, right? That's leadership. And it's not about, being right. It's about doing right.
Yeah,
And,
100%, man.
for me, I'll tell you the two biggest things I found before I left the government, when I used to go to certain meetings around DC, and even when I used to go to meetings at the Situation Room at the NSC and all kinds of stuff. The two problems I saw most why we couldn't make progress in a lot of areas, there were two issues: ego and turf. That's what everything came down to: egos and turf.
Yeah.
And you couldn't manage them. And the only ego I can manage is my own. Right. I can figure out how to manage my own ego. But when I watch the turf battles and I watch the egos clashing, when I was up in Buffalo and I got there and I was the new guy in charge of the bureau, I went around and met everybody and did all that stuff. And I just told them all, because I was kind of like, I guess I was the bigger fish in that small pond. Right.
Yeah.
But I told them all, what do you need, guys? What are we doing here? What's going on? How can I help you? Whatever. Whenever they called, the DEA would call and say, hey, need some help. Okay, good. What do you need? We were there to do that. And I never once would I ever lorded over hey, we're the FBI. We're the biggest fish here. No, it's like, hey, we're all looking to take some dirtbags off the board. Let's do it. Right. Hey, and there was never fight. We never had a fight. We never had a disagreement or anything. It was great.
That's always, every movie has that scene where there's a crime scene and then 3 FBI agents roll up and they're like, we're in charge now. Yeah. You know what's funny? And this isn't me taking a jab at the federal government or federal law enforcement, but what I saw doing 5 years with the feds and then 5 years with the locals, man, the locals are the guys and gals that are living and breathing investigations and working the beats and being out on patrol day in and day out. Right. Man, they have way more. I don't know if experience is the right word, but they live that life day in and day out. Whereas, like when I was a deputy with the Marshal Service, we'd make 1/10 of the arrests that you would make as a patrol officer. And it was kind of eye opener for me because a lot of people think the feds are like the pinnacle of law enforcement. No. Man, the pinnacle of law enforcement, in my opinion, is a patrol cop.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And I used to tell people this: we're not, the FBI, we're not Batman.
Yeah,
we don't do that. And I used to go out and give speeches, and I used to tell people the most effective tool against crime and terrorism is the uniformed police officer, sheriff, state trooper, and the marked police vehicle.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Those are your primary national security tools right there. When the feds come in, we can bring resources, right? Because a lot of times, the state and locals, they suffer for resources. We can bring resources, and we wield certain legal authority that the state and locals don't.
Yes. Yep.
Right.
For sure.
So when you put all that together is when you can really kick some ass.
Yeah. But it's funny because I've even had people say like, oh, well, when you were with the feds, you were in charge of the locals, right? It's like, no,
not even close.
Yeah, not at all. It's simply a jurisdictional issue.
Yeah.
Nobody is above or below. It's, it's figuring out how to work with each other. And the Marshal Service I've talked a lot of shit on the Marshal Service, but I've also, I just tell the truth in my experience. Man, their joint task force where they do combine the locals and the federal resources, that's where they start kicking ass the most.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Gang task forces, joint terrorism task forces. That's where you start integrating all those skills. Your resources, your assets, and your authorities. And I used to tell people this when I was in charge of the terrorist screening center. We had 13 to 15 different constituent partners inside of that. It was an interagency center. And it was like, some days it was like taking a bunch of cats and shaking them up in a bag, right?
Yeah, of course.
Because here I'm trying to line people up, not just from, how about this mix of people? State Department, CIA, NSA, some DOD components, DHS, CBP. I mean, and all of them have different mission needs and requirements. Right?
Yeah.
But when we can stack them and layer them, man, we're unbeatable.
Yeah.
We're unbeatable. And that's where and that's where those types of situations were great, but you don't see that largely in the government as a whole. There's always, like, again, egos and turf, right? That's not mine, that's not yours, that's, and that's where I think we fall short. And that's where you see some of the current issues, with all the things that are going on in the news right now, with the Russia, whatever you want to call it, Russia Gate.
Yeah.
You want to call it.
We're getting into that next for sure.
Crossfire hurricane and all that good stuff. But I will tell you, though, just from my time with the FBI, and as I said at the beginning, I would do it all over again if they let me. It was a outstanding career. I couldn't ask for better. I got to do some amazing things with amazing people, and I got to work in that, because after 9/11, it was really the whole bank robberies and the kidnapping and the violent crime stuff kind of got deprioritized. Right?
Yeah.
So I worked a lot in that secret squirrel world with a lot of our intelligence partners, and I worked with intelligence partners around the world after 9/11. And you want to talk about some phenomenal people overseas. I mean, there are some people who are just, you want to talk about, these people put foot to ass. I mean, it is no joke when you talk about like counterterrorism and security work. Yeah. It's amazing.
I imagine, and again, I don't know what you can speak to, but like the people that have dedicated their lives to counterterrorism and security with the border issue, what a nightmare. Yeah. What a nightmare.
It's awful. It's awful. I'll tell you, just in the news, I saw that in 2022, they had 88 encounters on the southern border of people who were listed on the terrorist watch list of the United States.
Shocking.
Right? That's 88 that they encountered, not 88 that slipped through the cracks.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. If they encountered 88, there's at least another 88 that slipped through, probably another 888.
It's a fair guess, right? And in the last few days, they just hit 6 more. People trying to come through the border. And I used to run the terrorist screening center, so that was the DHS and CBP were some of my constituent partners. They were my primary partners when we used to set up those passive and active surveillance networks through the ports of entry and at the borders, so we would know who we're dealing with. And it just seems like that whole machine has just kind of been shut off.
See, man, that is why people that are critical, smart thinking human beings are coming to the conclusion that this shit has to be by design. If you are changing our border policies in a manner that allows people on our terrorist watch list to slip under the radar, man, we have a problem,
Well, you know what, Greg, it's one of those things where it's like, you pay me now or you pay me later, right?
Yeah.
And when these people, and one of the way I used to explain the terrorist screening center, our concept was, we had a layered approach. We would stop people overseas. We would work with our intelligence partners overseas, and we would work with State Department to deny them visas. They couldn't get here.
Yeah.
Then the second level of protection was at the borders and the ports of entry. We would work with TSA, CBP, and other folks at DHS to make sure they couldn't enter the country.
Yeah.
And the third layer was, if they were inside the country already, because if they were U.S. citizens, they had a right to return. We had to give them a controlled reentry into the country. That's when the Joint Terrorism Task Forces would pick them up and do their investigative work. And
man, in the last 24 months, I want to say that the number is the people that are coming across the border. They've already identified people from 179 different countries coming in. So. Yeah. This isn't an issue with Mexican nationals trying to come across the border so they can provide a better life for their family back home. It's a lot darker than that. I think at this point, the folks from Central and South America are trying to shoulder their way through the crowds. 100%. Yeah, they're trying to shoulder their way in. They're even finding Chinese nationals sneaking in, Yeah, and it's a shame. And we turned off that security mechanism for whatever reason. The administration decided to shut that off. I think when the chickens come home to roost on that soon, there's gonna be a serious problem in the country. People are gonna demand some sort of corrective action. They're gonna demand it. Well, the thing that people are sick of, and if you look at comments on any social media post, they're over, like, the majority of comments is like, Nothing's going to fucking happen. These people are above the law. These people can do whatever they want. There's never going to be accountability. And it's hard to say otherwise, because over the last few years, it's like these people can just run amok. And I mean, you're a 25-year special agent saying that allowing these people in is egregious, yet they're doing it and nothing's happening, you know?
Right.
And for me, another shining example of that is close to my heart is how we pulled out of Afghanistan, you know?
I would tell you this, that was a debacle.
Again,
I couldn't, I'm just horrified.
And the thing is, going back to, is it by incompetence or is it an actual nefarious agenda? I can tell you right now, any infantryman private that has went through AIT in Fort Benning, Georgia, you could take a 19-year-old that just graduated AIT and say, hey, this is a secure objective that we want to collapse and pull out of. What does that look like? Okay, your perimeter security is last to collapse. Infantryman 101. You can learn that in Ranger School, patrol base operations. So you're telling me that the generals at the highest echelons of the military don't understand that concept? It's just absolutely impossible that they don't.
Well, I'll tell you this, and you'll probably hear the disgust in my voice. I have no love for my colleagues at State Department, but State Department was pretty much in charge of that whole circus. And from people I've spoken with, it was run poorly on all levels, and it was run in a way that was, it was not done in a way that was in the American national interest. I'll put it that
Absolutely not. Do you know who Chad Robichaud is? Are you familiar with him?
Yes, I've seen him on some of the podcasts where he told his story, and that was a remarkable story of what he did to go over and help expatriate some folks.
Yeah, and Chad Robichaud, I don't know if I'd say he's a friend of mine, but he's an acquaintance, and we've texted back and forth. We've talked a little bit, and we're actually going to move forward with some jiu-jitsu stuff because he's a jiu-jitsu black belt as well. And we're gonna partner with Fieldcraft Survival and do some cool stuff with jiu-jitsu. But speaking to him and hearing his perspectives, he went over there. He was boots on the ground. And you got people in Congress that are saying, I didn't see anything that I would call chaotic. And he goes, bro, there was mothers throwing their babies over walls and landing in concertina wire because they knew that if their children were raised under Taliban rule, that they would never have a shot at life. So they're willing to give up their own child on the spot just because they know what would happen to them if they didn't. It was a nightmare over there.
Well, you know what, that whole thing, and again, I'm watching from the peanut gallery now, but it was a stain on the country's honor.
For sure. And then the other side of it is that guys like me that, and the older I get, the more I reflect on the reasons behind the Afghan invasion and especially the Iraq invasion. Like we dedicated our entire youth to those wars. Between the ages of 21 and 29, I was deployed 14 times. And if you combined all of those deployments together, it was nearly 5 years deployed to those two countries. And, and just like you said, if I had to do it over again, I would, because that really helped grow and form me into the person that I am today. The things I saw, the things I experienced. But take my own personal experience out of it and just looking at it on, from a detached, looking at it from 30,000 feet saying, what are we doing? I can't honestly say like I'm proud that we did all those things, especially considering it was just like one day we decided, all right, we're done with this. And the thing is, we've done that with every conflict since World War II. And
we run out of will. We run out of political will.
Yep.
And it's a shame. It's a show of weakness, and it's a show of just a lack of fortitude as a nation. And I'll tell you this, and I heard this the other day, and I thought it was said very well, that the military is the clenched fist of a society. And it shows you what kind of society you're dealing with, and you can see what we're dealing with. And I have a personal interest as well. My son's active duty military, right? And he could be sent on a fool's errand like that and lose his life because a couple of folks in DC couldn't see past their own nonsense.
Yeah, they can't see past the end of their nose on this stuff, man.
And and my son, and he's an accomplished soldier, and he's going to be a career military guy. He loves it. But I can't see him going on one of those fool's errands
Yeah.
and then being left out there with, like you said, no security plan, no ability to protect yourself. Your rules of engagement are, basically you don't have any. You can't do anything,
Yeah.
right? So,
And
yeah,
then you see, I don't know if you saw this the other week where they're having a transgender um, drag queen sailor being the face, like a new face
yeah,
of recruiting, and it's like, man,
it's awesome.
you guys are even pushing all this stuff into the military, you know,
Yeah, I mean, it is.
and
You know
it's
what it
gonna
is, Greg? It's like a cancer.
yeah, it's gonna weaken us. You know,
Yeah, it's a
it's gonna
cancer.
weaken us, and the people that are doing it, in my opinion, they know it, and if they know it, why would they weaken our own military?
I don't know. It's because I think because they have absolute authority there, right? They
Uh
can
huh.
pretty much do what they want.
I
You know what
think
I
so
mean? They
too.
make
Yeah,
in
yeah.
these social experiments, they can do what they want in the military. And I saw that commercial. I saw some other just kind of disappointing stuff coming from our military. And, I love the military. I served, again, not in a combat capacity, but my son did. My daughter was in the Army, and, uh, I have a affinity for the military, but I am just floored. And here I'm watching other commercials, recruiting things from China and Russia. They're doing push-ups in the dirt. They're jumping out of airplanes. I mean, they're doing like hard guy stuff. And here we kind of got what we got going.
Well, one thing that I say often, I'm actually writing a book, and this is the title of it, is Courage Through Adversity. You have
Yeah,
to be put through very, very difficult tasks in training to build courage and build resilience. And I mean, that's military 101. Like log drills in the
yeah.
freezing rain and all of that stuff.
It's got to
It's not a
suck.
cakewalk.
Yeah, it's
The
got to
men,
suck,
the
right?
men and women that volunteer for that know that this is going to come with a tremendous amount of adversity. But on the other side of that, I'm going to be a hardened person. I'm going to be more capable and I'm going to be more resilient. That's military. That's the foundation of the military.
I think
You know,
I think it's a foundation of life. And when you put it that way, it's a life foundation.
100% it is.
Because I'll
And
tell you,
I mean,
here's a quick story about. Remember, I told you about cultural erosion with my former organization, right? With Euro.
yeah.
When I was up in Buffalo, and I was meeting with all the supervisors, and they started complaining about something being difficult. And I said, all right, hang on a second, right? I said, hang on a second. I said, we're the FBI. We are the heavy lifters. We do things that suck, because
Yeah,
if it was easy, and if it was very good work, and it was manageable, somebody else would have already handled it. When something
exactly.
comes to us, it sucks. And not only that, but it's probably already been half goat screwed by other people, and they're going to come and give it to us to help fix it.
Yep.
And people just got away from that. Well, this is hard work. Well, no shit, right?
Yeah.
That's kind
Yeah.
of what we do.
Man,
So
that's well, and the thing is, like, I talk about this very often on the show, is like physical hardships, even in a training environment. Like, I
yeah,
used to fight MMA and I still do jujitsu almost daily. And it's like, something that you hear often in the fight scene is you can't teach heart. And I always disagree with that. I think you can teach heart by making people go through arduous and difficult scenarios. And on the other side of that, you go out in the woods with Second Ranger Battalion in January and you freeze your ass off for a week. And for 1 week you were soaked and you were cold. And but when you're done with that, you realize, like, dude, guess what? I still accomplished the mission. We
yep,
still prevailed through all of that adversity, through all of that misery. We still got the job done. And that builds heart and that builds courage and that builds capability. And for some reason that's now frowned upon. It's shocking to me.
yeah. It's been an approach, or a set of principles that definitely has been deprioritized. I used to do some martial arts when I was younger, and you know, it, it, it I can't think of anything better to help people develop, like you said, that
100%.
perseverance, that the ability to remain. Hey, how many people do you think in their day-to-day lives have been in combative, adversarial interactions in their lives?
Yeah, hardly any of them.
Hardly any, right?
Yeah.
When I got to Quantico, and they were doing what they called defensive tactics, right? And I was watching what they were doing, and I'm thinking, hey, you're going to teach these people just enough pseudo fighting techniques so that they're going to go out and get their head caved in by
Exactly.
somebody by somebody who doesn't really want to be arrested when you try to put him in some come along move, or you try to twist
Yeah.
you try to twist their arm. They're going to say, all right, this ain't happening. You're going to get your tail kicked, especially the females.
100%.
Right?
Yeah. You can't say that about females. We're all equal. No, we're not all equal. We're all, and guess what? And we're not all equal as males either,
Hey, no. Hey, I'll tell you what, I've been on the receiving end of some very, very capable folks. And you're right, we're not all equal. But I'll tell you this, though, that inequality, so to speak, the difference, female agents are awesome, and they're smart, and they can go places and do things that I can't.
1000%. I used to say that all the time. Because there are guys that are like, dude, why the fuck do we got females? I mean, dude, I'll tell you a story.
No.
When I got to Central California, we were out on the range doing a qual, and one of our females was struggling. And it was hot. We were in San Bernardino. It was like 100 degrees. And one of the females fell out as a heat casualty. And my chief walks over to me and he goes, see, that's a fucking problem with females in our agency. And I'm like, dude, the chief just said that to me. Like, how unprofessional is that? But not only unprofessional, you're not looking big picture, because everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. And this same female was an absolute rock star investigator. All right. Yeah. So it's like, hey, she's not very good at PT. She's not very good on a rifle, but where are her strengths? And instead of just pretending we're all equal, how about we utilize people where they're best suited, Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I used to find taking the female agents out, and this is kind of dirty pool, right? But when I was working in the counterterrorism arena, a lot of the folks that I dealt with were from the Middle East, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, they are fascinated by blonde women.
Yep.
And there was a lady on my squad at the time. She was a very nice looking blonde woman. So I would bring her with me to talk to some of these people, where I would sit her right down in front of them and I would sit off to the side, and they couldn't wait to sit there and just start running their mouth and talk to her, right?
Well, and dude, a lot of people don't know this, but they're female Delta Force operators.
They call them
reason.
Funny. Yeah, they call them what they call them, the funny something around. My son was a operator there for a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
And he tells me about, they call them the funny platoon or something like that. But he said, they're all female operators.
When I was in Ramadi, my project manager was a former unit sergeant major. So, I mean, he'd been in the unit for a long time. And he was telling me a story about an operation, and he kept saying, and then she did this and she did that. And I said, Kurt, like, what are you talking about? Yeah. You were operating with girls? He goes, yeah, it's not very well known, but certain operations call for a female presence, and we understand that. And we have female operators because of that. And it's like, okay, but they're using them where they're best suited, because the unit didn't play all that bullshit. I don't know. The unit's probably even getting woke these days, because it seems like nobody's immune to it. But
I think it's a cancer. Yeah.
It's a cancer,
Well, hey, I'll tell you this much. Nothing impressed me more than when I used to be at Quantico for certain in-services and all that. When you'd see the SWAT teams come in, because they would go down there and train with the HRT guys.
Yep.
And you'd see females in line with all of them with their flight suits on, and they'd have all their stuff. Nothing more impressive to me than if you can do what the guys do and you can shoot like the guys shoot, then God bless you.
Yep, for sure, man.
Yeah.
Well, fuck, dude, we've already been at it an hour and a half.
All right. Let's talk about.
I want to go into the hoax / scandal, whatever you want to call it. But I wanted to get your opinion on it, and I'm going to kind of unpack it from what I understand, which may be very rudimentary. And then you can take it from the beginning. But from what I understand with the whole Russian collusion thing, in its foundation, it came from the Steele dossier. Is that a fair assessment?
It was built from the Steele dossier. It came in actually from a foreign liaison partner, provided some initial reporting.
And that was Igor Danchenko, correct?
No, Danchenko. It was from the Australian services. The government sent in some information that kind of perked up everybody's ears.
Well, is it fair to, from what I understand, is the Steele dossier, that whole investigation was funded and propagated from the DNC?
The Fusion GPS folks who provided some of that I would say, information that they went out and did a bunch of research on. They were an opposing research group to the Trump campaign, provided a lot of information. The Steele dossier came from that Christopher Steele, who got a lot of, I'd say, they're saying maybe up to 80% of his information from a subsource, and that's that Igor Danchenko.
Okay. Who, from what I understand, Igor Danchenko was already on the radar for being a possible spy, for lack of a better word.
Well, in that world, everybody's a possible spy.
Okay.
Right? I mean, when you're looking in that world, everybody's suspect.
And so, I mean, and I'm not trying to paint the picture that, like, necessarily that the Democrats orchestrated this whole thing, but when you detach emotionally and look at where the sources came from the beginning, it's like you got this Danchenko guy that is, for lack of a better term, should be an untrusted, unverified source, right?
Well, yeah, I'd say at a minimum. But this is a caveat we always used when doing human source reporting. And you always had to say that you didn't know whether the information was provided to inform as well as to influence.
There you go. Exactly. So right? Like it could go full circle, and Danchenko could have been putting out information to Steele purposefully to cause all of this, right?
Absolutely. Nobody knows really. I mean, he was, he went to court. They did all what they did, but.
And of course, he was acquitted. Shocking,
right?
Right. But my question is kind of like, when I'm trying to just look at this situation and connect the dots, for the FBI to basically almost entirely side with the Hillary Clinton campaign, do you think that was because all polls indicated she was going to be their boss before too long and they just wanted to be in her corner?
I think that this is my opinion. Again, going back to, you have to navigate the political environment. You cannot succumb to it. They started succumbing to it. They started trying to hedge.
Yes, I think so.
All right. And here's the bigger part of the problem. The folks that were working on the Crossfire Hurricane investigation is what it was codenamed as.
Yep.
They were all, I would say, like-minded. They all kind of leaned to the left a bit, right?
Yep.
And what I think happened was you had a small group of people, like-minded people, who were given some of this information. They were operating on adrenaline, maybe a little bit too much shot in the ass with what they were working on. Because, I mean, look at it. Here you are working on something that could change the course of American history.
Yep.
And likely almost did. And they also operated without proper oversight and opposing views. They became you've heard the term echo chamber, right?
Yep.
They became an echo chamber, and they reported directly to the deputy director of the FBI. So there was nobody between them and the most senior operations chief in the organization.
But even if it was inside of an echo chamber, as all of the fallout we've seen in the last couple of weeks, even with the Mueller report, even with the Durham report, it seems like there was never evidence of collusion. But then you still have Adam Schiff on TV nightly saying, and he was very careful with his words, right? He would always say, "We have evidence." Okay. What does that look like? Because he said it 100 times,
Well, from your law enforcement career, you could have evidence.
Yeah.
But what was it evidence of? And was it evidence supporting his position? Who did they get it from? Sourcing, whatever.
Was it corroborated at all?
That was part of the problem. Then when the Durham report came out, they said the FBI failed to do proper due diligence on the information it was provided at the beginning to predicate all of the investigative work that followed. So when that boulder started rolling down the hill, nobody stopped it at the top of the hill to say, "Hey, where is this information coming from? How good is this? Can we corroborate it? Do we do any other investigative work? Do we follow our own internal processes?" Right? That was not done, I would say, in a consistent, proper fashion.
Well, and part of me thinks it's not just that you're in an echo chamber, is that you have to draw the conclusion that the people that were involved in this investigation, and I know this is the conclusion that a lot of Americans are drawing right now, is that corruption inside of the FBI was simply assisting Hillary Clinton's election by defaming and painting Donald Trump out to be a Russian agent. And had Hillary won, I think this would have just kind of been brushed under the carpet. We wouldn't even be talking about it right now. But the fact that Trump won, they decided to double down on it and chase this Russian collusion for the last, I mean, this was 2016. And they're just now coming out with more and more facts. And the people that were involved, it feels like the conclusion is it was a scandal and it was corruption. And when people hear that's happening at the highest level of the FBI, now the trust is lost, and trust is a hard thing to earn back.
Yeah, I think just from the way it looks right now, of course you're absolutely right. I think what happened is that this small group of people was overempowered to do this. Again, they lacked proper oversight or opposing views. They lost, and I say this, they lost their emotional professionalism.
Mm-hmm.
They allowed their personal ideologies and political leanings to start bleeding into their investigative decision making as to who they would talk to and who they wouldn't, where they focused their time, what they prioritized, and did they and it's the same thing like when you write a paper on something. Do you have a premise, or do you do research and develop a premise? They had a premise and they were looking for ways to justify it,
while simultaneously lacking all of the investigative necessities to look at Hillary Clinton for her scandals. So it was like two things happening at the same time to protect her and then paint Donald Trump out to be a terrible person. And the thing is, it's like, it shouldn't matter if you lean left or if you lean right. Like when we can have organizations inside of the federal government go after people and paint them in a picture that's false, man, people need to be held accountable, and a lot of people don't think we're going to see accountability as a fallout of this.
I'll tell you this much: when I reviewed the Durham report, and this is probably where most people are going to kind of groan and roll their eyes, but there probably wasn't anything done that was illegal. Now, unethical, immoral, unprofessional, yeah. But illegal to where they can actually take someone and prosecute them, that probably isn't going to happen.
Man. And that
probably isn't going to happen.
I feel like that's what politicians always get away with, because they can, they can choose their words carefully, and they can kind of tiptoe around things. But we all know what was happening. For Adam Schiff to be on TV nightly saying we have evidence that Donald Trump is a Russian agent, and you don't. Okay,
yeah.
well, now what?
Yeah, and there's about 500 different ways he can back out of that, right? I mean, you're never going to have, especially when you're playing in that, and that's one of the other reasons. Like, they made it into a counterintelligence investigation, right?
Yeah,
they shut down the other investigations that were going on out in the field regarding some of the Clinton Foundation activities. Those were terminated, and they moved it into the counterintelligence world.
So, I mean, how can you just terminate an investigation on one side and then put all your resources into another investigation that, for all intents and purposes, it sounds like from the Durham report, they never had credible evidence from the very, very inception of this investigation. Yet it got all of the attention, it got all the resources for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And now we can just say, whoops. I mean, they're literally saying now, Adam Schiff said, I think it was a day ago, he's like, the Durham report is not credible, even though 5 years ago, he was celebrated by the Democratic Party.
Well, he's not credible in their eyes because he didn't help support their position.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
And other people are saying, well, this report doesn't mean anything because no one's getting arrested. Well, depending on who he would have recommended to be arrested, they would have been up in arms. So he's in a lose-lose as well, right? He's screwed either way he goes. And here's another thing with the Durham report. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, is people are looking at this report, and it's not a 360-degree, 100% total investigative wrap-up. with recommendations and all this. What he was doing is he was closing up shop. He summarized his findings.
Okay.
Right. That's what he did. It wasn't intended to be this, 100% solution on the whole investigative activity. He just said, here are the highlights. Here are the areas that we found issue with. Like he said, the FBI didn't do its due diligence. They departed from their own internal procedures. You had some folks that, pretty much like you said, had a, kind of they didn't like the president, what candidate Trump, and then of course President-elect Trump. They didn't like that very much, and you could see by some of their text messaging that they were anti-Trump, right? And when you allow those types of biases or preferences to roll into your investigative work, that's where that level of oversight pushes you back to the middle or removes you from the situation and says, hey, you can't be objective here, you're out.
So if you reviewed the entire report and the conclusion you came to was there was definitely biases and there was definitely like a one-sided approach, but simultaneously they weren't breaking the law, most Americans are going to look at that and be like, okay, well, just because there was no laws broken, it was still very clearly a witch hunt that was using government resources in a manner that is outside of integrity. What does the FBI need to do to regain that trust from the American people?
Well, I'll tell you this much. The FBI has been distracted from some of its core mission requirements for some time now. And I used to meet with the director daily. And before I left, I had to sit down with him because I was one of the I don't know if you know this, but the FBI is broken into 6 branches. And at the top of each,
I'm not familiar.
The FBI is broken into 6 branches. And at the top of each branch sits what they call an executive assistant director. And I was one of those. I was fortunate enough to be one of those folks. And I oversaw all the FBI science and technology programs. And then my other colleagues oversaw intelligence, national security, and things like that. And we would sit and talk with the director about certain issues and certain things. And the organization itself, during this time, it started eroding, where we started leaning into things a little bit more than we should have, right? And remember, this was the director Comey was in office when a lot of this went through. And then when the director Ray came in, he kind of inherited this kind of bucket of shit, right?
I was going to say,
and he had to figure, yeah, and he had to figure out how to move it on. The problem is while this was all going on and they were looking at all this stuff, there were still people who were very capable and competent saying, well, how do we see that this stuff isn't true? How do we make sure that we know we're right? And there were other folks who were I guess you can say the folks that were running the investigations just automatically said, no, we're going to take this information to face value and we're going to go from the 0 starting point up to the most intrusive investigative work that we can possibly do. And they didn't go through the scale, like kind of the use of force continuum, right?
Yep.
They didn't use the use of force continuum in the investigative sense. They just went from 0 to 100. Again, I think they let their emotions get away.
Just give a brief synopsis of the use of force continuum for people, because basically it's starting at the lowest level and progressing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, for law enforcement, of course, it's presence, and then you go up to verbal commands, and then you can go to hands-on, and you can go to impact weapons, things of that sort, right? For the investigative work in the Bureau, you can take information at a very basic level and you can do what they call a threat assessment. Hey, what is this? Right? Mm-hmm. And then if you say, okay, this looks like it might have a little bit of merit, you can do what they call a preliminary inquiry, which limits the scope of the investigation you can run. And then you can say, okay, in the preliminary inquiry, we really found some really not so good stuff. We're going to go to what they call a full field investigation. And that's where you start moving into some of that very invasive technical surveillance and things of that sort. And you can also start running undercover operations and doing some of the more sophisticated investigative work.
So if you take it using that approach at the lower levels, when things weren't panning out or they weren't showing to be what they thought they were at that point in time, they probably should have said, hey, you know what? We're not finding what we thought may be the case. And then that's kind of the conclusion, right?
Well, yeah, they could have came to that conclusion that, hey, this is all BS and this was all singular source reporting from a guy who can't corroborate anything. And they could have said, look, we're not going to pursue this any further, right?
Yeah.
And you close it down, and then you just make sure that nothing else comes up in the future, that type of thing. And that would have been the more logical approach, and that's probably the more standard approach. This thing, they went from 0 to 100 in no time flat. They were, again, I think they were very shot in the tail with what they had and what they were working with. And to be honest, I'm acquainted with all of those people. I know them all. And I
Yeah.
think that when you get into those small little groups like that, Greg, you can get a little bit of God complex, right?
100, yeah, 100%.
And that's where I think that someone didn't sit there and tell them, hey guys, what are you doing here? Why are we doing this? And explain to me why you're doing this. And I think when you have a bunch of like-minded people in the room and they all kind of lean in a certain direction, it's not difficult to get to certain outcomes after a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most frustrating aspects of all of this is that people want to look at our FBI or our DEA or any of the federal agencies, and they would like to believe that a political bias should have nothing to do with the day-to-day job of these organizations. And now that it's very clear that there is political bias, it's like, who's next?
I think Greg, I think the bureau, and I only speak for them. I won't speak for the other law enforcement agencies because they may have their own challenges.
I'll tell you, the ATF is another highly hated agency currently.
Yeah, they tend to be a lightning rod these days. But I will tell you this. As I said, I used to meet with the director, and when I was leaving the organization, I sat with him and I said, "Look, the FBI operates on a few primary currencies in my time, right?
Uh-huh.
And one of those currencies is competence. We had to be very competent, and I mean competent in everything we did from a technical, investigative, leadership level, law enforcement, everything. The competence of the FBI was used to be unquestioned.
Yes, 100%.
Right. The second thing we brought was credibility. The FBI was highly credible. When we said it was that way, and there was no hedging, there was no leaning one way or the other. There wasn't any of that hemming and hawing and shoulder shrugging. The bureau was the bureau, and if the bureau says this, then you can bet on it, right?
Yeah.
So the credibility we brought was our other currency, and the last part of it was our professionals. Right. Again, like I told you earlier, when the bureau showed up, you expected some guys and ladies in suits, and they were the feds, and they were gonna behave a certain way, and those three areas made up the brand of the bureau when you showed up, boots on the ground. And I told them, you got to be careful that those things aren't being squandered.
Yeah, which I would say they are at this point.
And he was, and he of course he wants to. Everybody else wants to sit around and he suffers the curse of being the boss, right? Everybody gets around him and wants to tell him, hey, boss, everything's awesome, everything's great, everything's good, no problem. And here I'm telling him, hey, you got to look out for this stuff, and you got to make sure that the FBI as a brand. I mean, he's the protector of the FBI brand as a director.
Well, I mean, what do I know? But I think one of the most powerful things that he could do is literally call a press conference and articulate that. And like, imagine if he was on CNN and Fox News saying, hey, you know what? We kind of lost our way for a little bit, and we behaved in a way that's not congruent with our morals and our ethics. And our job as the FBI is to be as absolutely nonpartisan. And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I just didn't take notice of this through my 20s and my 30s, but I never felt like the FBI was kind of part of a political party or had allegiance one way or the other. I felt like it doesn't matter who's in charge, they're doing what they do. And it seems like in the last decade, all of our federal agencies have now been kind of manipulated into playing the political game. And the political game is not what you guys should be part of.
No, the FBI used to take pride in the fact that it was apolitical.
There you go.
Right. And that was one of the heaviest selling points. Whenever somebody wanted an even objective hand in anything, they called the Bureau. And I think that's kind of gone away. over the past couple of years, I think people have lost that feeling of objectivity. But I'll tell you one little last story that we were out at Microsoft headquarters
Oh,
before I retired.
you're out my stomping grounds.
Yeah, we were out there and we were meeting with some of their very senior people at Microsoft. And one of them asked me at the time, he said, what's going on out in Washington, D.C., And I said, look, let me tell you this much. The FBI is okay on the working level. And I said, and here's what you must remember, that despite all of the buffoonery and all the stuff that goes on in the Washington, D.C. circus, the FBI is the same FBI that has protected you, your parents, and your grandparents. And it's the same FBI that will protect you, your children, and your grandchildren. The people of the FBI will not fail. It's how the organization is being led.
Yes.
Is the challenge. Because I'll tell you what, there are people that I work with that, and you'll understand this, that you would go through a door with them anytime.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And there are other people that are there that I don't know about, I don't know. Right.
Well, but the truth is, like, perception's reality, right? So if a large percentage of Americans feel like the FBI is pandering to one political party, then all trust is lost. And that's going to be a tough mountain to climb, trying to regain that trust.
Yeah, but one of the things I was a big proponent of is in order to gain trust, you have to show high character and results, right? And that's what they have to start doing again. They have to get a handle on what's going on. They have to stop doing stupid things, and they have to start showing results and show high levels of character. And when you have things going on where you have FBI agents doing backflips in bars, losing their gun on the ground.
That's right. That's right.
Then he has an AD and shoots somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of silly, but it just, when did that shit used to ever happen?
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with the Marshal Service. You've seen a lot of bullshit coming out of deputies doing similar shit like that. But I mean, that also comes down to hiring, which is a whole other podcast.
Well, yeah. But remember what I told you, what I was told when I first joined? They brought us in and they looked us all right in the face and said, do not embarrass the FBI.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, though, because I think one thing that is absolutely just non-existent at the highest political level is humility. Like, we have never seen a politician call a press conference and say, like, exactly what I just said. Hey, guys, there were some serious mistakes made. And, when we look back on all of these, we review this investigation and we see some of the things that we did. We made some mistakes. And based on those mistakes, this is what we're going to change. Maybe these are the people we're going to let go, or whatever it is. But Americans are dying to see some type of humility and accountability. And when we never see that, the frustration just continues to grow.
Well, I mean, people get to have that, meet the new boss, same as the old boss, right? And none of these things ever get resolved to the satisfaction of the American people. And I don't know what the answer to that is at this point, especially on this particular instance where you're looking at the Crossfire Hurricane situation. Again, the FBI kind of has lost its focus on its core mission. In my opinion, when I was one of those very senior people in the organization, I used to tell people our core mission is to be exceptional at conducting investigations and operations. Mm-hmm. Everything we do is just like supporting the warfighter. Everything you do supports the warfighter. Everything we do supports the investigative and operational enterprises of the FBI. And the FBI's become a little bit distracted as of the last few years, and they're more worried about other issues and navigating politics and diversity and everything else. And then you see that we have these shortfalls in certain areas. And then what they do is they just make new rules. And that's why you have a 900-page instruction book.
Yeah, exactly. That would take you a year to understand.
But no one reads.
Yeah.
Right? No one reads it.
Well, let me ask you this, though.
Yes.
One thing that I'm wondering is that, like, if the Trump administration gets reelected in 2024, mm-hmm. Are there people now that instead of coming out and supporting the truth, they're kind of like, oh shit, like heads are going to roll if that happens. So now we gotta play catch up, and we gotta try and get all our ducks in a row. And it's like, it's just more of playing the game instead of letting the truth prevail, admitting faults and moving forward. Because I think we all do understand that if Trump gets reelected, heads are going to roll, right?
I would say that if he's reelected, the whole leadership cadre at the top of the organization is going to be replaced, right? He's gonna make sure that the attorney general, whoever his attorney general is, because the FBI director works for the AG, right?
Yeah.
And whoever that is going to make sure that we have new leadership at the highest levels of the organization. And
you know, while as we sit here and talk about that, my personal opinion is that that's probably necessary and that's probably a good thing. But the other side of that is it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's just the pendulum swinging back and forth, and that's not progress. That's just, you know, that's where here we are again. Every 4 years, let's just replace everybody with people that support us. And
But Greg, that's what we talked about earlier, though, is the culture of the organization has to be the police of the organization. It's the culture, not the people.
So
it's got to be the culture.
So if Trump gets reelected, will you take the director spot if it's offered to you?
I would do it only on several conditions.
Because I talk to Junior sometimes. Maybe we can make this happen.
you tell Junior I'd be happy to help out. Only on several conditions, though. But I'll tell you this: it's like when you go back to the regiment, right?
Yep.
How many people move through that place on a given?
It's a revolving door for sure. Right. Yeah.
But what is the enduring culture of that place?
Yeah, the enduring culture remains 100%. Is that we're here, we're mission focused, we're training as hard as we can to be the best Rangers we can be, and day in and day out. Like the regiment prides itself. They always say, like, shy of being deployed to war, we train 48 weeks a year, period. And it we never, ever take our foot off the gas.
Right. And then that's the culture.
Yep.
Right. And the Army maintains that culture, where that's what I'm saying. If the FBI is going to recover, they got to bring back a culture of excellence. Let's stop pandering to people. The FBI should not be run like Google. Right?
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem, is those stoic G-men that used to be those folks that did whatever it took to get things done, and they were professional and they kept their mouths shut. They didn't complain. And if they did, it was among each other. And no one gave a shit what they thought. They had to get the job done, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's what we got to move back to, is that mission excellence, operational excellence, and the fact that here's my biggest thing is when you join the FBI, you sign up to be one of society's protectors. And I couldn't tell you how many soccer games I missed and how many cheerleading practices, and New Year's Eve I'm doing a search, jumping around in somebody's attic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just what it took. And that's what we got to get back to. And I think there's too much. The FBI wants to be run like Google. They're worried about climate survey scores and all this kind of shit. And I'm thinking, that's not how you run an organization that way. I mean, I don't know if they give climate surveys at the Ranger Regiment, but
yeah.
But that seems to be what's steering things. And what I would want to get back to is, what are we here for? Why are we doing this? And it's to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution. That's
which is like,
Bureau.
Listening to you say that, I mean, while it's honorable, it's admirable, it's also kind of like, duh. You know what I mean? Like,
hey, some of the solutions are the simplest.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'll tell you one thing: if you don't have people who are looking for career progression brought in to help realign the Bureau, if they're not looking to progress in their careers, I would go back, because I love the organization and I'm sad to see where it's at. And I still have that service mentality. I'd go back and say, look, I'll stay for a couple of years, but I'm going to go through here like a buzzsaw. I'm going to fix these problems. We're going to put a good leadership cadre in here. And then you're going to have a succession plan of leaders. Not every couple of years, you got a bunch of guys and ladies rolling through doing shit their own way. And you have to set that up. Why do you think certain organizations are successful for decades?
Yeah, exactly. Because they prioritize that. For
and
sure.
that's what they do, right?
Well, you got to be
You
playing the
can't,
long game, you know?
and that's what I think the bureau's kind of lost sight of. I think they react to the issue of the day, issue of the week. Oh, what's going on the Fox News ticker or the CNN news ticker? And holy shit, and then we're jumping through hoops trying to figure out what's going on, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to, hey, the bureau is the bureau, and this is what we do and how we do it. And yeah, we'll take care of your business, but you got to get out of the way, and that's what they got to get back to. Because the bureau used to be a monolithic organization, right?
Yeah.
And I remember the old timers saying when there was a shooting, the bureau would show up. If a bureau guy shot somebody, they'd show up and they'd push everybody out and say, "Get out of here! This is a federal matter now," and they would take care of it,
Uh-huh.
right? And some
Yeah.
folks would say, "Well, that's not the right way to do it because this and that you can cover ups and blah blah blah." That's not what I'm talking about. The FBI used to be that type of organization that was trusted. It took care of its business and it gave people that comfort when and then and I know we're running on, but I'll tell you this last thing I told the director before I retired and walked out the door after 25 years. I said the most comforting, and you'll appreciate this, the most comforting thing to most people during a crisis situation, they really want to see those FBI jackets or United States military uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
I told them that's when the American people are at their most secure to say, thank God they're here. And I told them you can't lose that.
Yeah, you can't lose that. I mean, we both remember 9/11 like yesterday, and
Huh?
I mean, it's unfortunate that it takes tragedy to bring people back to that. But at that time, our law enforcement, our military, our first responders, everybody was revered. It's like the people that are putting others first, man, that's what America's about, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's like there's a part of me, and it's sad to say this, but there's a part of me that believes maybe it is going to take another national tragedy before we can put aside all of the bullshit differences and say, you know what? Yeah, I like to sleep with these people, and these are my political beliefs, and this is where I stand on this issue. But at the end of the day,
Right.
we're fucking Americans. And if people
Yeah.
could just have that mentality, we would see a monumental shift in the American culture as a whole. But it's like it seems like an uphill battle because every time you turn your television on, every time you look at your phone, there's all of these things that are in place to combat that.
Yeah. I remember polarize, marginalize, and demonize.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you this much: no one's worried about their pronouns when they're scared.
100%. Yeah. Like
Right.
all the little bullshit that people focus on, it's exactly
It's 'cause-
that, you know?
Because you're too comfortable, you're not scared. And I'll tell you that I think everybody would benefit from being maybe a little cold sometimes, maybe a little tired sometimes, maybe a little hungry, and maybe a little scared.
Yeah.
It would bring things into focus.
I mean, I don't know if you listen to my podcast or not, but
I do.
Okay. So one thing that I say all the time is that we need to endure hardship as a country because being someone that's lived all over the world in third world countries, like, and I'm not envious of the state in which those people are living their lives in, but when you have to go down to the river to fetch a pail of water and you have to worry about being eaten by a Nile crocodile,
Right.
you're not worried about your pronouns on TikTok. Your day-to-day life has real problems that if you don't navigate them correctly could be catastrophic. And that's been the human experience literally since the dawn of mankind until what? The last century, maybe? Yeah. Or even less.
I wouldn't even say the last half a century.
Even less than
How about that?
You know?
The last half a century.
And that's why, like, a big part of my mission is just put that adversity in front of you, because without your adversity, you get soft. And when we get soft as a nation, the weird thing for me is that pick up a fucking history book. Human beings are conquerors by nature. And if America ever gets weak enough to the point where our adversaries can look at us and say, you know what? I see an opportunity. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to take it. That's not some wacko conspiracy. That's human nature. You know?
No, that's the history of the world.
That's the history of the world, man.
And it's not going to end. And I think that people here are very comfortable and sheltered And people like yourself who have been around the world, you see some other people live in some pretty rough areas and with some pretty rough conditions with, I would say, less than honorable governing, structures
Yeah.
around them, right? And people here are they're pretty well off. People here are pretty good, and I think they become spoiled. And I don't know how you fix that. I mean, that's a social issue, like you said. Maybe is going to take a catastrophe, but I would say that organizations like my former employer, the FBI, they can start helping that by, hey, let's get professional. Let's set an example. Let's get that faith back. Let's make sure that the American people have something to look toward and try to make things right. And that's what's got to happen. And once one organization does it, and another organization can do it, and then we can get back on track slowly but surely. But we need leadership, and it goes back to that initial part of our conversation. Without true leadership and people not looking to benefit personally, it's going to be a long road, my friend.
Yeah. I mean, I say it often, courage is contagious. And it's the same principle in what you just spoke to, because it's like when other people see either individuals or organizations standing up for the right thing and saying the right things and drawing hard lines, people like that. And like you said, you listen to Andy Frisella, so personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion, right? That's not
hey, tell me he wasn't on fire today.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I was listening to him this morning when I was running errands.
Yeah.
It's funny. You know what? It's funny listening to people that you're personal friends with too, because it starts to get convoluted in your mind. What was a conversation or what you listened to in a podcast, right? But so like, I'll always say like, yeah, me and Andy were talking and he said this, and it's like, oh wait, no, that was just an episode of Real AF. But the truth is he's spot on with that. And if personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion, sure, it starts with you as the individual, but it should carry into your organizations and your corporations and everything. And if people would start putting an emphasis on that, I think we could see the world change as a whole. But the other side of that coin is, and I have a friend that is extremely wealthy. He's a very successful businessman here in Western Washington. And I was talking to him about this stuff yesterday, and he goes, the truth is, Greg, most people throughout history are just non-performers. And he goes, and I'm not saying this in a way to like be derogatory. I'm just saying it's just statistical facts. And the truth is, the more non-performers are out there, the easier it is for the performers to work their way to the top and be successful. And it's like, fuck, man, like that sounds dark. You know what I mean?
You know what though? But I think he's right. And I think we are, we are social animals, and social animals live in herd or social settings. And that's how it is. You have the protectors, you have the productive folks, and you have then the rest of the herd.
Yeah.
Tribe, whatever you want to call it. And that's how things work. And I think with a lot of our organizations now, a lot of folks they're afraid to step away from the herd.
Yeah, 100%, man. And like, we look at all of these historical figures of people that stood out and showed courage and showed resilience. And I think a lot of us like to think that, man, that's what America used to be. But that's what the books are written about. That's a very select group of people. I think throughout history, I mean, look at medieval Europe. You had the monarchy, you had a select group of people at the top, and then everybody else was peasants out in the field, And I feel like maybe we want to change that, but I think it also might just be the human condition,
I think it is on some level. Honestly, I really do. But we can do better than we are doing. Right.
Yeah. And if you don't believe that, then it's probably time to just get off this rotating rock, because like what else are you here for?
Yeah, I think we can do better. I think we took a turn south when I heard a gentleman. He was a very articulate man, and he said, when we started having problems in our society was when the reasonable person standard was replaced with the most sensitive person standard.
Yes, 100%.
And I thought that was really well put, where used to be what's most reasonable. Now it's, wait a minute, who's the most sensitive person? And we've taken a position of appeasement, and you saw how that worked out for Europe in World War II, appeasing Hitler, not so good. But when we start appeasing, then we start settling for mediocrity. we start actually celebrating mediocrity, and that's kind of what's led us to some of these challenges, in my
Man,
opinion.
I think you're 100% right. And you've referenced a poor culture in the current FBI,
Yeah,
but let's be honest, that culture didn't start in the FBI. That's an American culture problem, and it starts. I mean, it literally starts in our elementary schools. I, I had to
yeah,
pull my kids out because I saw exactly that mediocrity in
yeah.
the way that what they teach their kids and what we teach them to prioritize. And like, while our adversaries, you watch videos of Chinese kindergartners learning to break down AK-47s. You
Yeah, I thought
see,
that was awesome.
yeah, you see videos of Russian 5-year-olds during recess. They go outside. The first thing they do is have to jump in the ice tub, and then you can get out and have recess. And like,
Yeah,
if we tried to implement something like that in America, people would be
uh,
calling it abuse. And it's like, no, 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 no. We're just making them a little tougher, and that's going to pay
yeah.
dividends on the back end, man.
No, it will, but again, everything has kind of been moved to that most sensitive person standard, and I think it hurts us. But I'll ask you this: what happens when you have an underperformer at the regiment?
Yeah, yeah, they're gone. Well, I
They,
should say this. I should say this because I talk about it often. If you fall below the standards in Ranger Regiment, they will give you 3 weeks to rest, recoup, train up, whatever you need to do, and then you get your reassessment. If you
right, that's
fail
fair,
yeah, because maybe you had the flu on the day of the PT test or whatever, right?
right?
But if you fail your reassessment, goodbye. And it's no hard feelings. It's we're not trying to be dicks to people, or it's like, this is the standard that you have to maintain to be part of this unit. And if you can't maintain it, it's time to go. And
Right. It's not for everybody, right? It's not for everybody.
but I'll tell people this too, man, having clear, understood standards, people think that that's a hard place to live. It's actually an easier place to live because you can just, okay, if on any given day I can't do 8 pull-ups, and 8 pull-ups isn't that hard, but that's the
Right.
in the Ranger Regiment. 8 pull-ups is the chopping block standard.
Right.
So okay, to be here, I have to be able to do 8 pull-ups. Very simple concept, but it's those things are lost on people now, and it's sad, man.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, from a leadership perspective, at the regiment, the leadership there, and I'm guessing from standing from afar, but they're there to help make sure that the standards are in place, that they're clear, and that they're enforced.
100%. And
Okay.
I say this all the time, man. I think one of the biggest keys of leadership is consistency. You can't be the leader that bounces back and forth and you don't know who's showing up in the morning, because like that keeps people in a constant state of chaos, right?
Right.
But it doesn't matter what your leadership style is. If you're consistent and you hold the standards, that's the path to success. And I had plenty of NCOs that weren't the most pleasant people, but their mission wasn't to be a pleasant person. Their mission was to make sure that the regiment was the capable fighting force that it's supposed to be. Now, when I became an NCO, I made a conscious effort, and I also became an NCO in a time of war. So things were a little different too. I was a private in the peacetime military. And in the peacetime military, inevitably, the things like hazing and all that shit kind of it gets out of control at times, right? But in wartime, people get reined back in because it forces you to understand, like, hey, this guy I'm going to be downrange with, and he needs to have my back. And so, again, it kind of supports what we talked about a couple minutes ago. Once you're facing real world problems and real adversity, it really brings everybody together in a way that you can't in a peacetime,
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the biggest problems I saw with the FBI before I left was that we generated a few generations of leaders who were more concerned about being liked than they were in being effective in keeping those standards. And I'm not saying you have to treat people like dirt and be
Yeah, of course not. Yeah,
people, right? Because you don't get the best out of folks. You're treating them like garbage. But it was more of a popularity and likability contest than it was to say, is this person a great operational leader? Can they get their people to accomplish no fail missions? Who's going to put their hand up for a no fail mission? right?
Yeah.
Now everybody takes a step backwards. Used to be before you couldn't get enough people, they'd be pushing and shoving to get to the front.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is where does that come from? Organizational culture, leadership, climate, and when you get people, I'd rather have a B grade performer who will run through walls than an A grade performer who's a prima donna, who high maintenance, kind of all that stuff.
Yeah, for
I'll take
sure,
the
man.
B. I'll take the B. I'll even take a C plus guy any day
Uh-huh.
because because they'll run through walls for you, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's where we got to get back to as far as that the organization goes. I have faith in them. I think that there's still enough people left in the bureau who can toe the line, and they are towing the line. And you'll see some of this stuff on the news, with the political theater that's going on and everything. But there are folks who are still towing the line, and they'll continue to do it, like I told those folks at Microsoft.
Well, I'm happy that you came on and you shared all this, because I can tell you, being in it's weird now that people look to me as like an influencer or whatever, because I just feel like a guy, right? But when your podcast gets big enough or your Instagram gets big enough, people will come to you with questions, and they're seeking like solutions to these problems. And it's like, dude, I don't have these solutions. But at the same time, I think everybody kind of collectively together does know what the solution is. And when they hear it from a guy that was there for 25 years saying that, no, this organization as a whole is still filled with great people, it still has great potential, this is just a bump in the road that needs to get straightened out.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that message gives people hope, because there's a lot of people out there right now that think that the federal government is their enemy now. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that I don't go there sometimes myself when I hear my people that are personal friends of mine, like Mike Glover, or I had another buddy who he made a video about what the insurgent uniform, right? Like, and he was a ranger with me, and he has a training company. FBI agents called him to talk to him about his YouTube video about insurgent attire. And he said they were being like he had a conference call with them. And I was like, you shouldn't have even taken that call. You should have lawyered up, right? But he had a conversation with them, and he's like, man, it was two agents, and one was treating me like shit, and then one was being real cool to me, and it immediately felt like good cop, bad cop. And it's like, man,
but Greg, it's that kind of amateurish stuff that
that's
the
what I'm
Bureau
saying. That's what I'm
was
saying.
never known for.
Yeah.
We never did that kind of stuff. If you can't go out and have a conversation, especially with somebody like your buddy, right? He's a former military guy. He's a regiment guy. You're not going to go out there and what are you going to throw good cop, bad cop on this guy? I mean, come on.
And so you hear these incidents that start to tarnish the reputation, and it's like, it's a breath of fresh air hearing that guys at the highest level of that organization, like yourself, also see it for what it is, understand what needs to be corrected, and hopefully when the new administration takes charge, you can be reappointed.
Well, you tell your connections on that side. I'd be happy to help.
That would be great.
It does make me sad to see the slippage, and the country actually needs the Bureau.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe this is just the older you get, the more kind of like doomsday conspiracy theory-ish you get. But I honestly feel, and I don't know if this is just tinfoil hat shit or if it's potentially reality, but I feel like we're at a tipping point right now where if we don't get on track and we don't start prioritizing the things that need to be prioritized, every empire falls. That's just history, right? Oh. And I feel like this is potentially the beginning of the downfall of America.
Well, remember, the Roman Empire fell. It fell 500 years before it actually ceased to exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I don't know. I hope we're not already on that downward slope. I mean, there's too much good, and there's too much potential for the United States if we could just get past this point we're in right now. And I really think that again, national leadership is going to be the key, and we'll see what happens. But hey, if you have a chance, pass my regards to Mr. Frisella. Like I said, I enjoy his show. He was on fire today, and I really appreciate you having me on to share some ideas with you and your audience. And happy to talk anytime offline if you have any other, I would say more pertinent things you'd like to talk about.
No, I appreciate it, and Yeah, we'll wrap this up and stick around for a minute after we stop recording, because I think I would like to connect you with some of those guys, because when you have someone that's walked the walk, that is solution oriented, your voice is important, man. And I think every single person that feels that things aren't going the way that they should be going, and is willing to step up and voice those concerns and actually be a face behind these, because it's easy to type something on Twitter, all the controversial stuff is like a profile with a bunch of numbers and no picture. We need people willing to step up, put it on the line, and say, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe. And that's how we actually affect change,
I agree. So thank you again. I appreciate it, and I hope your audience finds some of this remotely entertaining from my side. I know you're always entertaining, but from my side,
I think we'll have a lot of people that appreciate it, but there'll definitely be the percentage of people that says, he's a shill, he's on the inside, he's pushing the agenda.
Of course,
and that's just how it is, man. So
of course. So all right, well, thank you.